The dearth continued to ravage all who had their hands in the cornucopia of internationalized trade, not just as a change from rich to poor, but as a continuous, grinding poverty that reminded the people daily that they balanced upon the razor's edge of life and death. Across the board, things got worse for essentially everyone. European life expectancy fell from an average of 65 to 57. Similar trends could be seen in literacy rates and even new marriages, while infectious disease and general criminality skyrocketed, making the cities of the civilized world some of the most dangerous places on Earth, not plagued by willful criminals, but desperate ones. As a result, with governments unable to deliver their people the lives they had promised, instability was the rule of the day. On April 8, 1856, North German nationalists rose up in their thousands, long oppressed by their overlords, and enforced their demands upon France, causing the North German Federation to secede from the country, and finally establish a homeland for the German people. Outside of Brandenburg, that is, which considered itself more metropolitan than nationalist in the first place. Meanwhile, beginning in May, Vannonia began to plan. The seeds for this plan were planted in 1857 with the death of President Thorgill Scott in his pitiable second term, replaced by an ambitious conservative, President Bailly Castaigne. Castaigne was a ruthless industrialist with the widest scope of mind a man could have, and with his wise investments in real, stable, and tangible capital in the form of materials investments like copper and gold, he was able to weather Black Thursday, losing only a fraction of his wealth. As such, people saw him as a model capitalist, and a sound financial mind destined to bring Vannonia back from the brink, and perhaps even up and out of the dearth. His plan, however, was this. Vannonia's closest neighbor and economic rival, France, was the second most industrialized nation in the world. But with the impact of the dearth shuttering most of their factories, they had legions of poor, unemployed souls. As such, President Castaigne began to issue clandestine work visas to these French destitutes, ferrying them across the channel in the dead of night. The catch was that the terms of the work visa carried with them an obligation to work impossible hours and meet unmeetable quotas. These people, unable to read the Vannin language, signed and agreed to terms which would turn them into slaves if they failed to meet their quotas. President Castaigne immediately shipped over several thousand men, most of whom slipped into slavery soon thereafter. Then, President Castaigne's secret plan truly came into its own. With the profits he gained from working these men essentially to death, he fronted the boilerplate expenses for a litany of generous social programs like old age security, unemployment benefits, and even free medical care for women and children. The people, of course, were largely unaware of what Castaigne had done. When it came out in 1858 that thousands of men in northwestern France had not died of something but instead had simply vanished, France went looking and soon stumbled upon Vannonian soldiers with stacks of work visas, 24 of whom they promptly arrested. Enraged, King Pierre Ollery of France demanded his citizens be released from unjust enslavement. President Bailly Castaigne of Vannonia countered that these men had sealed their own fate, agreeing to the terms of their work visa, and that France was illegally holding soldiers of the Vannonian army hostage for political gain. France refused to release them, and Vannonia cancelled military access to France, shutting down the channel and becoming allies with Alençon. Military options were beginning to be weighed, even though such a thing would violate the Pax Maltensis. This did not go unnoticed by Italy, which convened the other signatories in an attempt to save or otherwise salvage the peace with a kind of appeasement. While they deliberated, Vannonia thought that, in the case of a war, it could wrench 4 provinces away from France in the region of Languedoc that Vannonia had an ethnic minority in and therefore had claims on. On April 2, 1858, Italy presented the two with the option that the slaves and prisoners could be exchanged, and the other signatories would provide substantial financial recompense for lost productivity. President Castaigne actually was warm to the idea, and was ready to accept the terms. That was, until France hanged all 24 soldiers on April 10, 1858, leading to a state of war, and bringing the Pax Malatensis 107 years of continuous peace to an end. The Pax Malatensis was null and void, and due to the civil terms of the treaty that had been accepted since its signing in 1752, this meant that nobody was subject to the treaty anymore. Indeed, the Franco-Vannonian War raged unfettered. Vannonia blockaded one of France's main ports with several thousand ships, which proved to be highly effective against them, devastating their meager trade income, plundering their richest ports of call and sending the wealth back home to the desperately poor. Surprisingly, a few months later, Italy joined in on the side of Vannonia, desperate for the potential plunder they could gain in such a conflict, with the potential of that wealth to help lift them out of the dearth. However, they were delayed due to an industrial disaster which affected their ability to mass-produce boots for their men. Later in May, war broke out between Poland, Lithuania, and Visegrad, the two behemoths of Eastern Europe seizing upon the renewed festival of war that was the middle of the 19th century. A century of tension and quiet rage released all at once. By April, the Franco-Vannonian War was going smoothly, and Italy threw in their own war goal of taking the province of Franche-Comté. It was in September that the French people started begging for mercy. On September 12, 1858, the war was over and France was cut in half. Vannonia annexed Languedoc and Italy got Franche-Comté. Vannonia had reasserted itself as a great power, doubled its industrial output, and earned the fear and admiration of the other great powers. Because of this, Italy actually displaced Poland-Lithuania as the premier European power, and also embodied a new role as Vannonia's firm and faithful ally. This war proved that Vannonia was able to field and maintain one of the world's strongest militaries, and was able to project its power even through the ravages of the dearth. However, while President Costain was a hero for the time, that money couldn't last forever. In fact, as the social programs grew, more people went on them, and a vicious cycle began, quietly at first. Because the slave population was working for nothing in the factories, and that population continued to grow due to new French captures, that meant there were fewer and fewer jobs for the suffering common man of Vannonia. But, for now, that earth-shattering realization was but a whisper, and the flag was flying high, ignorant of the storm of its own making that lay ahead. Meanwhile, to the east, the ongoing war between Poland, Lithuania, and Visegrad had cost them their positions as the most powerful states in the world, and they both continued to slip. This was ironic due to the fact that this war was simply to eliminate a rival, to make sure one of the greatest powers would remain so. Back to the west, in the aftermath of the Franco-Vannonian War, France fell rapidly in international favor, nearly losing their seat among the great powers altogether. However, most shocking of all was who inherited the first place: the hulking Oriental Empire of the Maturids. Due to this new age of war and industrialism, they were easily able to dwarf the industrial and even military might of all the other players on the world stage. The only thing holding them back was their inability to project their power beyond Central Asia, hemmed in so by Likandu and the Grand Republic of China. However, the people reading the papers knew, and they knew that one more war could make all the difference.